if technology is to truly help drive growth in Nigeria, government must invest in talent, very early stage. We can't do it all the way to the level where they're extremely proficient, but government can boil that ocean.
I'd like to invite to join me on the stage the Honorable Minister of Communications, Innovation, and Digital for Nigeria, Dr. Bosun Tijani. Can we give him a round of applause, please? Thank you, sir. Please. All right. We are super honored that Dr. Tijani has joined us again this year. It's been a very full year for you. So you've crafted an ambitious agenda for Nigeria's digital transformation. And in this audience are many members of the ecosystem. They're investors, they're founders, they're builders. We have big tech and enterprise people in here. And they want to know how your policies for digital transformation, how the agenda that you set out translates to economic growth for the country.
It's good to be back, and congratulations for the second edition of
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think I'll start with the last word, which is growth, right? Economic growth. For those that have been following the state of our nation probably for the last 20 plus years, know that this is something that government after government has been putting significant effort into. And it's not just something that is unique to Nigeria. That's the role of government, driving economic prosperity. But we also know that the easiest way for us to talk about economic growth is to look at GDP, right? We look at our gross domestic product because that's the core, most basic way of measuring whether a nation is growing or not. Of course, you can ask questions as to whether GDP leads to better quality of life for people or not. And particularly on the African continent, one thing that we've been struggling with in terms of being able to raise the level of GDP is productivity. Correct. And again, if you have economics background, you probably know that there's absolutely no way you can drive productivity without technology. True. Right? So just making the case for why the ministry is important, why this audience is important, why the technology ecosystem is important. And I think lastly, for the foundation, again, if you have some sort of economics background, you probably know about Cobb-Douglas production function, which says for you to truly leapfrog growth, you must introduce technological innovation. Right?
Yeah.
And a practical example would be today, the United States is reducing the amount of land that is being cultivated for agriculture. And they're also seeing a significant drop in the people that work in agriculture. But what we call total factor productivity for the US in agriculture has been rising for the last so many years. Okay. The only explanation for that, again, if you look at total factor productivity, is technology. So I think that's the foundation of the way we see our work at the ministry. And I think historically, the technology and startup ecosystem and the business community tends to want to narrate the story that the singular role of government is policy, okay, which is actually not true. If we truly will leapfrog economic development in most African countries, we must understand that government's role should be beyond policy, but also helping to boil the ocean. Because there are certain aspects of the foundation that you require to drive growth that the private sector will probably never touch. Okay. And most of us are living, we can bear testimony to this. A good example would be that, one, we do understand that you can't grow the technology ecosystem without talent, right? Okay, yeah. We know that, yeah? And tell me why you know this. TechCabal was part of the story of Andela, for instance. Andela started out of CCO just like TechCabal. Yeah. And I remember when Iyoluwa said it's possible to train entry-level tech employees in 3 months. And that was what led to the Andela that we know today. But we also then know the trajectory of where Andela has been, pivoting away from
They
that.
needed exits. They needed...
Pivoting away from that early career. Andela has done tremendously well for our ecosystem. But the sad truth is that for a venture-backed organization, they can't boil the ocean for the country. And that's where the role of government is then critical, where you have to ensure that you invest in the foundational set of talents that can drive the progress that you want to see in society. And that's the first part of our strategic blueprint as a ministry. Recognizing the fact that if technology is to truly help drive growth in Nigeria, government must invest in talent, very early stage. We can't do it all the way to the level where they're extremely proficient, but government can boil that ocean and create a large pool. That's one example. The other example, which is quite strongly, it's been featured strongly in what we do, is also infrastructure.
Absolutely.
If we truly want technology to, again, help drive development, we all know the role of digital technologies. And without connectivity, there's no digital technologies that can truly scale. As a nation, we've been extremely fortunate to see significant private investment in our telecommunications sector. We've seen about close to between 35 to 45,000 investment in fiber optic network in Nigeria.
Yep.
But the reality is that for us to truly cover our nation to the point where we can start to think of smart use of technology for security, for education across the country, for agriculture, Nigeria should be laying about 120,000 kilometers of fiber optic network. Today, as a minister, I've seen private investors that decides where to invest in fiber optic network based on something that is called nighttime satellite data.
Yeah.
If you're a Nigerian, you know what that means, right? So at night, they take the images of the country and they see where lights are popping up. And this light is meant to indicate economic activities. And if you're like me and you've been across Nigeria, you know that that's not the reality. I'm part of a community somewhere in Ogun State that is called Imashayi. They've never had electricity, I think probably for the last 7 or so years from the grid. But the reality is this is a community that is begging for quality education, healthcare, government services. This is a community where people are being creative to using alternative means of generating power. If you judge by nighttime satellite data, that's not a place where you're going to invest into because the businesses don't see returns coming from it. And we've seen these cases all over the world where for countries that had to truly leapfrog connectivity, countries like South Africa, for instance, governments has had to participate in actually helping to deepen that network, which is the second part of the work we're doing at the ministry. Ensuring that government can actually invest in the backbone that will help us truly use technology so that when this community, when you're building, you're sure that when we say we have 230 million people in the country, that they have meaningful access to connectivity and you can actually deliver solutions to them as well. So those are two examples. Of course, one thing I've done without boring the entire crowd is for the first time in the history of this ministry, 2 months after being appointed, we released a strategic blueprint, which is online. I think we have hard copies of it here. The strategic blueprint is hinged on 5 key pillars. One is talent, which I've talked about. The second is infrastructure. The third is policy, where we're saying our policies should be pro-innovation and not just be there to regulate. And the third is understanding that if we have decent pool of talent, if we have strong infrastructure, if our policy is pro-innovation, we need this community, which is the entrepreneurs to actually help us build for critical sector. And the last one, which I think we should all care about, is trade. Because Nigeria, for some funny reasons, is rated as one of the lowest countries when it comes to the ECI trade index for technology, which means we're not exporting technology, and that's a fat lie, as we all know. Because we know that Nigeria has a significant number of technology companies operating in multiple countries. But of course, the reason why it's not being recognized is that most of you have registered these businesses in Delaware.
Thank you, Minister. So I think there's a few things here just to capture and summarize. So it's critical that technology helps to leapfrog. And I think we've seen that all the way from the printing press all the way till today. And I think TechCabal definitely believes that if we're going to grow over the next decade and beyond on the continent, technology will be the big driver of that. I've captured that. You said policy is important, but also the government has to play a role in boiling the ocean, which means essentially training the first people in terms of talent, doing some of the things that people might not do for commercial reason. So a very, very commercially driven audience might not be willing to tackle certain things. The government must tackle that so that the ecosystem is viable. And we're doing that in terms of training talent, in terms of things like laying fiber. The telcos will do what is commercially viable for them, but the government, I believe, through the broadband plan, aims to build a backbone for the nation so that even places that don't seem immediately economically viable at the beginning can be reached. And so those are some of the things that the government's doing. Technology is evolving rapidly across the globe. Things like AI are sort of changing exponentially. There's a big argument as to the fact that, look, let's solve power before we go and solve AI over there. How do you think about this? The fact that the world is moving so quickly and so aggressively. We have such basic issues to solve. Should we just face our basic issues? Like, why are we spending time with AI and things like that?
I think it's a smart question on paper. And the way people tend to approach it as well is also smart on paper. But the reality is that if you're going to be visionary about it, there's absolutely no world where you focus on wicked problems. So for all those people on Twitter that have been asking me about why am I focusing on AI and when there's no electricity, there's absolutely nothing smart about that question. And I'll pack it and I'll answer. The reality is that for Africa, historically, we've battled with what we refer to in economics as wicked problems. These are problems that the solution to them and the requirement for solving them, they're constantly evolving, right? That they're the kind of problems. So for those in education, for instance, 10, 15 years ago, we were told we needed to train more teachers and we needed to build more classes. Today, that's not going to fix the education
Nobody's
problem.
telling you to do that.
Exactly. So even when we talk about jobs, right, when we talk about job creation, the future of job we already know is changed. And the opportunities that are out there are begging for people to work in spaces like artificial intelligence. So when we talk about AI, you need to understand the entire ecosystem of artificial intelligence to truly say whether Nigeria should participate or not. Because when people talk about electricity, you're only thinking of the infrastructure element of it, where you're thinking of the data center, the GPUs, how do we power it? But the reality is that there's no artificial intelligence without digitizing our data. And some people need to actually do the work of digitizing data sets for continents like Africa, where we have a lot of dark data.
Otherwise,
there's no reason.
Global LLMs that don't have African
it's
data.
Okay, we can even have the global LLM. Let's say we can't do the LLM. We can have, but these guys, OpenAI, they require folks to help them digitize and supply it. It's a business opportunity that continent like Africa should be leading. Because AI is not going to be where we need it to be if certain part of the world's context is not digitized. If everything we know about Africa is not digitized, AI is not going to be where it needs to be. And you can do digitization of data without doing the actual processing of it, without the GPU. Of course, it's not what we want, which is why folks like me will continue to push and ensure that we can invest in infrastructure. The issue of electricity is an opportunity for us to actually think of, can Africa become a superpower in alternative kind of energy, cleaner form of energy that the world wants to invest in? I have a good friend in Egypt, Cam Solar, who is investing heavily in solar form of energy. Why can't we build startups like that here? It's an opportunity. But let's say we're not even focusing on that. Africa, Nigeria can come up with some of the smartest new ways of digitizing data so that we can actually get paid for doing that part of the work. And we can hone a part of the AI ecosystem. So all these young people that we're talking about in Nigeria, 70% of our people are under the age of 30. The average age in Nigeria is 17.5. The jobs they need will not be the jobs that we have today. When I set up my farm, people were surprised. I saw young computer science graduates working on my farm, not necessarily tilling the ground, but they're flying the drones on the farm. Because I was able to introduce technology, I have these young people who are now excited about agriculture. Those are the kind of jobs that we need to create for our people. So talking about AI from the perspective of whether it's ready for Africa or not, I think is a big mistake. And I also believe, lastly on this topic, that the technology ecosystem, we would have failed our people and the future generation if we sleep on artificial intelligence. Because these are a set of technologies that will control what you think, how we do literally everything. And folks will wake up in 5 years and ask not just me as the minister, but also you, Tomiwa, and every ecosystem leader, what were we doing when this thing started? We're already late to the game, but we need to do what we need to do to be part of it, to ensure we can leverage it. And for those who think AI is going to cost us jobs, it's not true. I started by explaining that the level of productivity along nearly all our sectors is extremely low. What AI will do is actually help us open up so many of the sectors so we can actually create more jobs. So those guys flying drones can be on many more farms, jobs that we've never had before.
Fantastic. So I hear there's an economic opportunity here, and we shouldn't think about this just as a cost center. I hear that if we don't do it right now, we will continue to get further behind, and so it will be problematic in the future. I hear that there are places where we have an opportunity to actually lead, the same way we've led in fintech on a global basis, where we've created solutions and ways of doing things that the world wasn't ready for yet. I have 2 more questions before we get to the audience questions. Please put up the Slido for the audience so they can ask a couple of questions. Talking about trade and our presence on the ECI index, but also just in terms of how we trade more with the continent and how we trade more with the globe from a digital perspective. What are your thoughts? What do we need to do? I mean, you talk with leaders from across the continent, you talk with global leaders. What needs to change for Africa to play a bigger digital trade role in digital trade globally?
I think the first thing is we need to allow the younger generation to actually show us the way. I think this is what we need to do. You know, I founded CC Hub. I was fortunate to help scale it to Kenya, to Rwanda, to Namibia. I think I was part of the conversation on Togo as well. And you know, perhaps because I'm a builder, I was amazed at how easy it was to actually scale companies across Africa. Of course, if you wanted to, I'm not saying it's not difficult. I hardly see difficulties when I do things that I'm passionate about. But my thinking is that you also have folks like Flutterwave, Paystack, and several other companies that have been doing business across the continent. This is truly what we want to see when we talk about intra-Africa trade, which means we can open up the opportunity for larger markets for our people as they build. And I also strongly believe that intra-Africa trade is not just an opportunity for you to approach bigger markets, but it's also an opportunity for us to leverage the strength of the different markets. The uniqueness of Rwanda is different from what you find in Nigeria. So for a company that is building, you can actually leverage Rwanda to strengthen yourself as an organization. What you get in Southern Africa is totally different from what you get in West Africa. And the market may not be the same as well, but as a company, being able to access that market and the expertise that exists there strengthens who you are as an entity and how you can participate. So we've been doing this thing. And I think the biggest gap, however, is that the policymakers are somewhat disconnected. We've not built the bridge that we need to see to connect the reality of those who are building and those who are making policies. This is the biggest thing that I think is missing. And until we'll do that, we will struggle to be able to unlock and take away the barriers that are currently there that are still limiting people from actually building. It is why you see that the biggest successes in intra-African trade has been within the digital space, because these are not physical goods, so it's a lot easier for people to trade in digital across borders. The moment we start to do this connection, the moment we start to get more folks from the startup ecosystem to become our ministers, and we ensure that we keep them there, as against trying to boot them out, then we'll start to create the opportunity to actually influence policies in manners that can help to drive the growth we need to see across the African continent. And until we do that, we will struggle. Because Africa is beautiful. We have tremendous resources. When I was setting up CC Hub in Namibia, I was amazed at how beautiful that country is. as a nation.
I've heard.
It may not have the largest market, but Namibia should be producing a lot of the Nollywood movies and all the movies we're producing on the African continent. They've got something to offer the African continent that we're not seeing. They have scientific expertise that startups can leverage that we're at the minute not leveraging. So we desperately need to connect our countries for good. But to do that, there needs to be strong, clear relationship between policymakers, and I think in particular, not just the private sector, the startup ecosystem.
The startup ecosystem. I really like the minister's point here, and I mean, I'm speaking with somebody who's actually done it, who's actually built across the continent and scaled a business across the continent. There's several companies here for Moonshot that are doing the same, and there are other companies that are facilitating that trade across the continent, so Sabi and Raynest, and many of them, so please interact with them. My final question speaks to your last point, which is about the connection between the startup ecosystem and government. And the question here is, how do we plug in better? Because you have an ambitious blueprint, and I'm not sure that it's always clear to the people in the startup ecosystem. I mean, first of all, there's a thing about startup people, which is, I'm just going to go. I don't need government. I don't need anybody. I'm just going to go. But let's even set that aside. What do they need to know about how to work better with government? What do they need to know about how to work with your ministry? How do we improve that?
I think the first thing startup ecosystem should understand is everything you see from Abuja, don't be deceived, it's coming from Lagos.
Okay.
That's the honest truth. From the private sector, there's absolutely no ministry that is not being influenced by the private sector. You should not deceive yourself about that. And I think the startup ecosystem should also learn from that and ensure that they can participate in how things are being done in Abuja. That for me is the first step. I think the startup ecosystem should also try to not necessarily fully mimic your traditional private sector, because what the startup ecosystem should be using government for is to deepen platforms that will let you build at scale. If you copy the traditional private sector, they look for opportunities most of the time that will serve individual businesses. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But that's not the nature of the startup ecosystem. Startup ecosystem would thrive on platforms, right? If we're able to open up and ensure that the 230 million Nigerians that we have today are fully, meaningfully connected, they can have access to affordable devices, more startups will be successful. That's different from one startup, TechCabal, coming to me and saying, what can you do for me as TechCabal? That's not the way we think in the startup ecosystem. And I think the ecosystem intermediaries should understand this. The laws that you want to see when we talk about artificial intelligence, your question should be, how can government help ensure that there's more data sets that can be useful for the ecosystem? Not how can government give a contract to one startup. One thing that is strong in our agenda that we've been working hard on, and the startup ecosystem is not saying anything about, that we know for sure has happened all over the world, that if we can unlock it for Nigeria, will change the fortune of startups, is what we call the digital public infrastructure. The ability for us to creatively use technology in government, but also ensure that there's seamless data exchange across government agencies. Once we can unlock this, your ability to build and grow businesses will change tremendously overnight, because it means that citizens can now properly be well identified. Beyond that, there's a payment system that is tightly connected with the government, so you can actually verify people easily. And also that things like what the Ministry of Interiors, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, all the data set that they sit on are connected. And they're then open and accessible by the economy. So you can imagine that health startup that is trying to build, or an edtech startup that is trying to build a solution for schools, being able to actually see schools and be able to see the performance of kids, know where kids are struggling, and where you can target your products to. This is something we're building. Those are the kind of things I think startup ecosystem should be obsessed about. And the world is obsessed about it. People are reading our strategy blueprint globally, And we're getting fantastic comments, supports on it. So I challenge the startup ecosystem to look as well. Because we know that a lot of people are not looking at the document. One of the things people complain about the most is NIPOST. For instance, many people want to see NIPOST transformed. But do you know that the details are in the strategic document, but people are not paying attention to it? This is one of the agencies in Nigeria with over 10,000 employees. Before we came into government, it was already divided into 4 different agencies. The first thing we had to do was bring it all back. A lot of petitions, land grabbing, and so many things that we had to correct for us to be able to build any innovation into NIPOST. And we stated it clearly in the strategic blueprint that this is something we hope to deliver in 2025. So startup ecosystem should help us to raise the level of governance by engaging meaningfully, not just through emotions and ideas that are not rooted in fact.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. We're kind of out of time, but I'm going to take a few moments, I feel about 5 extra minutes, to answer some of the questions that people have, or have the minister answer some of the questions that we've raised on Slido. The first one I see here is, what does the minister want to be remembered for? Like, what do you want to be your legacy?
Building platforms. So one clearly that I'm obsessed about is the fiber network. I need to push that number significantly higher up. I'd love to see, I know the telcos will not like this, I would love to see a geo in Nigeria. So that's one. The digital public infrastructure is also one that I think once we build, we will unlock a lot of values for the country. It will transform how we use technology in government. And you know what I enjoy the most about my job at CCHub? So this is extremely personal and it is meaningful. Is when I travel the world and I see people tap me on the shoulder and said, I used to be at CCHub.
That's amazing.
So yeah. I know 3MTT is going to be extremely successful. So when I'm growing old, I'll see folks that will tell me I was part of 3MTT. I got my start
from 3MTT.
So those are some of the 3 things that I would love to see well done.
Amazing. Why do you think most Nigerian tech companies register in Delaware? I mean, I can answer this, but what's your solution for that?
I don't think I have a single solution. I'm not the type that propose, I'm not the minister that will tell you this is the solution. I like to bring people together to figure out a solution. But I have to tell you, I registered CCHub in Nigeria. It's fully registered in Nigeria. I've tried setting up a fund in Nigeria. It was set up in Nigeria. All the subsidiaries of CCHub, all the companies that you see, whether it's high up in Nairobi, Rwanda, the parent company is CCHub in Nigeria. And I can tell you that I'm yet to see anything in this country that is threatening to shut down my business. So there's the notion in the startup ecosystem, and the investors will push this a lot, that where you put your business, beyond the fact that you should raise money, it's easier to raise money when you're in Delaware. They make us believe that domiciling businesses in Nigeria is dangerous, is risky, and all of that. I've been a businessman as well. I've not seen any risk associated with it. A lot of it is assumption. And I think most of us will get burnt down the line when we actually have to meet the regulatory requirements of some of these countries where we're setting up our businesses that we don't have clarity. We've seen banks shutting down and threatening the existence of startups because they registered and they had to be with those places. I don't have the answer. I think a lot of it some of it are rooted in reality, policy issues that we need to fix. But my understanding is that we will never fix those things if we don't come together to actually find answers to them. We'll never fix them. What we're doing is fixing individual businesses' reality, which is fine. That's what business people do. But they're also the kind of business people that are visionary, that lays the foundation for the development of any nation. The reality is that a lot of the top technology companies that we celebrate today, some of them only pay payees. They don't pay their income tax properly in this country because they are not Nigerian businesses and they find ways to manage these things. So the country you want to see is actually not going to happen if we all continue to build that way. What we wake up tomorrow and we're fortunate, or maybe in 8 years' time, and Tomiwa is the president.
So I start my campaign now?
8 years' time, you're the president. So what are you going to build based on? When all the companies that are supposed to support you to strengthen your economy, they are based outside of your economy. So we need to figure it out together. The solution is not that we keep running. We need leaders. Not all business people are leaders. Some business people build their businesses for their own returns, and that's perfectly fine. But we need business folks that are leaders who are passionate about the fact that this is a great nation. that must develop.
I'm going to take two more questions. So there's one about what is the future of blockchain and African tech? And I'm not a blockchain guy, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the DJ of NITDA is there. So one of the things I'm doing is looking at all the policies that we have, where I think we need to upgrade them, we upgrade them. Where I think we need to redo them completely, we redo them. And the blockchain policy is one where we're actually starting all over again. We've been reviewing it, we're going to start it all over again. Open it up for the entire ecosystem to be part of. And we invite people. The way we invited people for AI, and not everyone joined, but a lot of people joined. We've had over 500 people participate in the process of our AI strategy. We will do the same for blockchain. And I think blockchain is not just crypto. I'm sure we all know that. So if the question was meant for crypto, I'm not going to answer.
Excellent. I'm going to ask the audience, we're not going to get through all of these questions. We will save them. Please, control room, can we save these questions? We're actually at TechCabal doing an extensive series reviewing the minister's work, his policies.
Which I'm not very happy about.
I know. We've tried to treat them with depth and with thoughtfulness, and we'll continue to do so. So we'll tackle some of these. Some of them we can also raise with the Director General of NITDA. Welcome, sir, when he speaks later on today. But Minister, I'd like to thank you very, very much for taking the time to come and to meet with us and to share your ideas. He's going to be around. There are a set of closed-door sessions where we hope to work through trade and think tanks for the ecosystem and engagement with the industry. And we really appreciate you dedicating the time to us. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Tamara.
Can we give one round of applause?